Our newest unusual suspect. He is a journalist, filmmaker, author, conscious rapper, founder of the Conscious Resistance Network on the consciousresistance.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Derrick Broze. Derrick, thanks for joining us, brother.
Hey, thank you for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Derrick, can you do me a favor? Take a quick minute. Tell everybody at home who you are, what you do, and what your mission on Earth is.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. So for the last 14 years, I've been working as a freelance investigative journalist, self-taught, originally based in Houston, Texas. I now live between Texas and Mexico. And over the last 14 years, I've done, a whole range of activism, from whether that's the protests and the marches and the rallies and all that stuff, to building community gardens, raising money for various causes back in Houston. And over time, started to realize, like many of us, that the mainstream corporate media does not do their job, or more correctly, they purposely fail, you could say. And I decided that I was going to pick up a camera and start going to press conferences in Houston, questioning the mayor, questioning the police chief, starting to investigate. And eventually I was told by two different sources in the Houston Police Department that I was under surveillance in 2014. And that led me down a rabbit hole of trying to understand, well, what does surveillance technology even mean? Learning about cell phone surveillance, facial recognition, gate detection, heat detection, all kinds of fun tools that governments and police have. And that was really the push for me to dive deeper and take journalism seriously. Since then, I've written a few different books, my most popular being How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, which deals a lot with the surveillance state that we're moving into. I also produce documentaries, most recently working on a 17-part documentary series called The Pyramid of Power, that attempts to answer the question of who and what really runs the world. And as you said, I run the website, The Conscious Resistance, where I try to do investigative journalism and also exploring, spirituality, psychedelics, meditation, questions like that. And I'm a contributor at The Last American Vagabond, where I write weekly articles. And overall, I'm just a person trying to promote decentralization, localization, waking up people to some of the darker truths, and most importantly, trying to focus on solutions.
Oh, dude, God bless you. Derrick, so your journey, because I really did some research on you. Your journey has been a wild one, from depression to suicide, to drug addiction, to prison, then journalism. One of the things that stuck out, so your Epstein investigating. We talked about him, from time to time. We just had the Planet Fitness CEO and founder here. I think pedophilia, sex trafficking is one of the biggest problems that we face. But as we all know, it isn't. Is it for the elites running the world? Because a lot of them are involved in this type of behavior, so it's never on the forefront. It's always kind of swept under the rug. You've been investigating Epstein since 2016. You expose his activities and his connections to powerful individuals, business, and politics. You even went to his Palm Beach home in 2018, which ultimately led to you releasing your documentary, Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein. What can you tell us about the whole situation, Derrick? That stuff that we haven't heard or already know about the situation since then to where we are today, because I know there's been a lot of news about Epstein coming out.
Sure. Yeah, and I know that the valuetainment audience is familiar with this because of my colleague, Whitney Webb. She also is a contributor at The Last American Vagabond. And of course, Whitney's done amazing work with her book, One Nation Under Blackmail. As you mentioned, I started investigating Epstein in 2016, went on an adventure just interviewing people. I went to some of the trials, some of the hearings for victims before Epstein was arrested back in 2017. And so I've been paying attention to this case from the beginning. And I think you kind of pointed to the reality here, is that, yes, more and more people know the name Jeffrey Epstein, and people understand that most likely Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. Obviously, that became a meme. It became a joke on Saturday Night Live. But I think for me, the big picture here is that it's been now going on 5 years since Epstein allegedly killed himself, and since he was arrested, and almost 20 years since the original charges against Jeffrey Epstein. And even though people know that name, we still do not have the truth, which ultimately I think connects Jeffrey Epstein to intelligence networks, the Israeli intelligence networks, probably British and US intelligence networks as well. This has been admitted in numerous places and well documented, as well as Whitney's work showing the connections to the mafia, to organized crime in the US and elsewhere. And despite some of us having those pieces of the puzzle, that is not the official story that we're told. There's a little bit of admission of truth in the mainstream. Jeffrey Epstein was this guy who was connected to a lot of famous, powerful people. He was having wild parties, and there was some trafficking of young girls. But he was arrested. We got Ghislaine Maxwell. She's in prison, and it's all tied up in a nice bow. But I think ultimately those who have been following this and understand the case know that we still have not got to the bottom, and that plenty of people who were involved in the crimes related to Jeffrey Epstein continue to go free. And then the other point I would make is that as important as Jeffrey Epstein is or was, it's also important to remember that he was just one network in a larger worldwide network of these kinds of things. I've covered similar cases in my documentary, Who Will Find What the Finders Hide, about the Finders cult going back to the 80s. You can look at the Franklin scandal. More recently, I've been doing some work on this case in Utah, that the sheriff's office out there announced 2 years ago that they were investigating, in their own words, ritualized child sexual abuse of children. And that's an ongoing investigation. So these things are happening. Of course, we got the P. Diddy news and all that's in the mainstream right now. But this is a lot more prevalent than people want to realize. And it's across politics, academia, Hollywood, religions. It's in all different areas of our life. Unfortunately, at the top levels, these people appear to be into pedophilia and into trafficking children.
And knowing that they can get away with it. Shane wants to ask you a question.
Yeah, Derek, when you mentioned networks, I was just thinking about you've written before about technocracy and the pyramids of power. I think you call it in one article. So what would you say? We always like to ask this question: who is the they? When people talk about the they, could you just give your take on how power breaks down globally and how Epstein fit into this power structure?
Sure. So I would encourage people, first off, they want to learn more about the Pyramid of Power series, go to thepyramidofpower.net, just all spelled out. And so the reason I broke down this documentary series into 17 parts, which we've released 13 of them so far, the 14th will be out in just a couple of weeks. And by the end of this year, the whole series should be done. The 17th episode is aimed at answering the question you just asked: who or what, is at the top of the pyramid? Who is the they? Because I don't think it's as simple as pointing out one particular group. In the documentary, first we look at the education system, then we look at the corporate media, then we look at Hollywood, then we look at big wireless, then you look at the military industrial complex. You start to realize that it's not just one single entity, one single group, one single religion, things like that. Of course, there's a lot of different theories, and I've interviewed a lot of really well-educated researchers and investigators and philosophers as part of the series to get their take on it. And the final episode, we're just going to offer all those different opinions, from people who say it's the reptiles to it's this religion, or it's this religion, or it's this organization, and kind of put it all out there. My personal belief is, and this is not necessarily a satisfactory answer, we could point to certain names that pop up over and over. Of course, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and then even higher levels than them, people like Henry Kissinger, people like Zbigniew Brzezinski. And of course, right now, a lot of people are aware of the Klaus Schwabs, the World Economic Forum. But I do think even behind them, there are more people. But ultimately, I believe that this pyramid of power, this, what I also call the predator class, really survives and thrives because of the false belief in authority. When you look at every one of these different areas of the pyramid of power, including the pedophilia issue, which is going to be our next chapter, chapter 15, called the pedo class, which will go deeper into this, you see that, unfortunately, like in the case of, let's say, a priest abusing a child, there's a level of trust that a parent or a child has with that apparent authority figure. It's a pastor, it's a politician, it's a celebrity you can trust. People often, many of us, we hand over our power voluntarily by blindly trusting in these people that we're told are the authorities, are the experts. And so my belief is, ultimately, this whole system kind of rests on that idea that because we are voluntarily, consensually giving away our authority and our own power to other people and just choosing, well, I'm just going to trust this person or follow this candidate or follow this influencer or whatever it may be, humanity is often led astray down the roads that we're on now. And that, unfortunately, is not a road that is leading us towards more freedom, more liberty, more privacy, more bodily autonomy, which is what I think most people want.
Hey, Derek, really quick, in regards to the whole sex trafficking, pedophilia, underage, all that stuff, how big and how important of a supply chain is the wide open border that we have currently? That I think as of right now, we're at 90,000 children that are missing. No bodies found. No, we found the bone or something. It's just they're absolutely gone and missing. And that's a conservative number, which I actually heard another number that the number is way higher. Where do you think that comes into this whole surplus, the supply chain for these demons?
Yeah, well, I mean, we know that these people, these sick people, like you said, demons, I think is an appropriate term. They play off any sort of crisis, or if they don't manufacture the crisis themselves and then take advantage of it. The border is one of those crises. We could look to, for example, a few years ago, many people are aware of the Clinton Foundation, Hillary Clinton, and their involvement in trafficking of children in Haiti after the earthquake. You see, there's a situation like that, a situation that any normal person would think like, wow, what can we do to help? The Clintons, in this case, go out there, they send their people, they're claiming they're there to help people. And for those who don't know about this story, look up Laura Silsby, look up Hillary Clinton, Haiti. Their own people were caught trying to traffic and sell children. And then Bill Clinton goes and makes a visit, and they're able to kind of brush it all under the rug. So these people look for crises to take advantage of. I would say the war in Ukraine would be another one. And of course, the border, where there are, I think, genuine people trying to come to the United States because they want to get away from violence, which is often caused by the U.S. foreign policy. But clearly, that is not the case for every single person coming across. And there's been a lot of attention paid to the fact that there's a lot of men that are trying to cross. You know, I think sometimes that can be easily explained that men are leaving families behind to come make money and send it home. But I don't think that can account for everything. And when you have a situation that is essentially a wide open border where there's very little accountability, there's very little tracking of when a child comes in, are they being brought with their actual parent? And then, as we know, the Biden administration, and this has happened in previous administrations, but it's continuing to happen today, people will come across the border and then they'll get bused to some city, get bused to some other state where there's no tracking of where they're going, if they're actually going to make it somewhere safe, if they're going to be processed, if they're going into the hands of child traffickers. So this situation is absolutely ripe for abuse.
Okay, Rob, you have a question?
I do. Nice to meet you, sir. We have an article up on VT.com written by one of our co-hosts here, Shane. What was the title of the article for the Jeffrey Epstein article?
200 cell phones can now be tracked due to data leak. Cell phones that went to Epstein Island.
So there was a investigation done by Wired in which they tracked the cell phone data of 200 cell phones that were pinged at Little St. James Island, and then they tracked those cell phones back to 160 locations throughout the United States and several other countries. Predominantly, though, when you look at the map of the cell phone pings, what you see is that a central hub in the United States of these pings of the cell phones that pinged at Epstein's Island also pinged back to residencies and offices inside of Washington, D.C. Are you familiar with the cell phone data leak? Have you investigated any of that? And do you have any thoughts on the Wired investigation into that cell phone data?
Yeah, I did Wired investigation. I think that's more important information. As time goes on, we're getting details like this we've already known. And I looked at the map, and I did think that was interesting. I mean, the map of the island is interesting. It doesn't really tell us a whole lot because, of course, we don't really know what was going on the island. We have some buildings, but there has been long-term suspicion that there was underground facilities in Epstein's Island and things that, you know, obviously are not visible from satellites. So where we're seeing pings on the island, it's a little bit more difficult to tell what was going on or what buildings they were in. But in terms of back in the U.S., absolutely, I noticed right away. You mentioned the D.C. There's definitely a cluster around D.C. and just more broadly, I think the East Coast. Like when you look at, say, the Midwest or over in Montana, Idaho, I don't know if there was any, maybe a few there, but it just showed there's a few on the West Coast as well. I saw a couple pings here in Texas. But for the most part, it is really clustered around the East Coast and around Virginia, around the D.C. area. And I think this just further corroborates what we've known. I mean, there's I'm not sure if we're allowed to say it here, but there's a case that goes back a few years ago, of course, known by the name Pizzagate, that is a whole can of worms. But I will just say that there was truth to that story that involved people, again, and not only in the Democratic Party. I think sometimes people get so focused on the left, they realize that when you look through history, you can find Republicans, right-wingers involved in this as well. But the focus on, in that case, on a pizza parlor, I think was a mistake. There was definitely some crazy, creepy stuff going on there. For anybody who remembers that, a lot of that's been deleted off the internet. But that also showed that there was a cluster of people based in DC, lobbyists that would go to certain restaurants in this particular area of DC. And there was, in some of the businesses, they had symbols related to pedophilia, related to child love, things like that. When I look at my Finders research, that goes back to the 1980s. The Finders cult was based in DC, based in farms in Virginia, and involved the founder of the Finders was coming out of Air Force intelligence. So this isn't really surprising, but it does give us a little bit more detail. Now, it would be great if Wired or whoever had this data, they probably can't do this legally, but if they would de-anonymize that data and just say whose cell phones these are, that would be great, of course.
Yeah, I agree, because the pings were done between 2016 and 2019. So that means that these people, the cell phones that belong to these people, they knowingly associated, assuming that Jeffrey Epstein was at his own island, they knowingly associated with a convicted pedophile, because he was convicted
Absolutely.
in 2008 for prostitution of a child, correct?
Yeah. AKA pedophilia. AKA pedophilia.
So these people knowingly are at least, maybe he wasn't there. Let's give these people, these scum of the earth, the benefit of the doubt. He wasn't there. They still had to know what weird island they were going to, and that it was owned and operated by a convicted pedophile, and they chose to go.
Yeah,
But speaking of that conviction against Epstein, nice to meet you, Derrick, by the way. That is where I believe the suit in Florida was where they found out, the investigators were told Epstein belongs to intelligence.
Alexander Acosta stated that when they went to investigate, and correct me if I'm wrong, Derrick, Alexander Acosta, who worked in the Trump administration and was I think he was the Attorney General of South Florida, or the South Florida District Attorney, he was the one that said that Epstein belonged to intelligence, which is why they didn't investigate him previously to the 2008
Because that's what I
Federal
wanted
informant.
to ask. That's what I wanted to ask Derrick about. You mentioned or alluded to the Mossad, the CIA, MI6, all these other intelligence agencies. Have you come across anything having to do with that we might not know about?
I'm sure that it's probably been covered in other places, but I will reiterate. I mean, what you guys said, first of all, is absolutely true. Alexander Acosta, who was made the labor secretary during the Trump administration, he goes back to Florida. He helped them develop the original sweetheart deal for Epstein, which allowed him to get off on lesser charges, which allowed him to be held at the county jail where he was allowed to be out for 20 hours a day and then basically come back and sleep. He was still allowed to get visitors at the county jail, including, we know, young girls. And so that's all out there. For me, these are the kind of things that, as an independent journalist who does my best to confront politicians when the opportunity arises, Alexander Acosta is still walking around somewhere. He just says this in a congressional hearing. We were told he was connected to intelligence, and he never elaborates. He said another time that was above my pay grade and things like this. I just don't understand how the American public is not out there confronting people like him everywhere he goes until we get an answer. Like, tell us the truth. What intelligence agency was Epstein connected to? What do you know? We of course speculate, as I mentioned, the Israeli intelligence, and then there is connections to the British MI6 through Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, who also died under mysterious circumstances, and it is believed that he is the one that first originally recruited Epstein. And there's plenty of documentation, even from veteran reporter Seymour Hersh, going back to a book called The Samson Option back in, I think, the 90s, where he was first talking about Robert Maxwell's through his media connections and his connections to the Israeli intelligence and British MI6. And he dies on a yacht very mysteriously. And it seems like Ghislaine sort of picked up where he left off and worked with Epstein, and it continued on. Of course, none of us really believe that these types of things have ended just because Epstein is out of the picture one way or the other, and because Ghislaine is in some federal minimum security prison where she's treated much better than her victims.
Go ahead, Rob, you have another question?
One final question for you as far as the Epstein stuff is concerned. We've spoken with Mark Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein's brother, who has tried to obtain the medical records regarding Jeffrey's death through the records that he was able to obtain that were looked at by forensic pathologists. According to Mark Epstein, he does not believe that his brother killed himself. Derrick, through your line of work, through your investigations, two questions. A, do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein is dead? And two, B, I guess, if he is in fact dead, do you believe that he killed himself?
Well, I'll start with the second one. I don't think he killed himself if he is actually dead. And I've heard people float different theories that, for example, if he was indeed, as it appears, an intelligence asset, whether Israeli, MI6, CIA, etc., that this could be them taking back one of their assets and taking them into witness protection or something, and then, rebranding. You'll see people joke on the internet, Epstein's sitting off in an island somewhere, he's hanging out, relaxing in Israel or whatever. I mean, I guess that's possible. But for me, what seems more likely, if you had someone who was an asset who then became a threat, or you were concerned that, hey, now the feds are going after him for some reason, and people who are above that and beyond that and who are worried about being exposed might have decided, like, look, that he's no longer valuable to us. He's actually now a liability, and we need to get rid of him. We know that he was visited in the prison. We know that all these, the cameras and all the crazy things going on. So it doesn't seem, whatever happened, we know that it wasn't above board. But for me, my money says that he was killed by somebody I wouldn't claim to know, but it seems like it would be much easier just to cut him loose and be done with him than try to collect him from the prison and then go store him off safely where, he could be exposed later. And maybe not. Maybe there's, maybe they have such good espionage that Epstein is alive, sitting somewhere sipping on a margarita, and we'll never see him again. But in my experience with what are sometimes known as NOCs, non-official undercover, when somebody is working undercover for an intelligence agency, they're typically told that if they are exposed, like you've seen in the movies with Mission Impossible or something like that, if they're exposed, that they will be cut loose and they will be basically disavowed. There'll be no knowledge of them, and they're pretty much on their own. That's what I saw in the Finders case, and I think that's probably what happened with Epstein, that he played a role for a while, and once that role no longer became useful, he was cut loose and his life was put to an end.
And Derrick, thank you. Derrick, we have like a 1 minute left. And mind you, because I know what some of the viewers are going to say, guys, you keep talking Epstein, you can't. We just had the CEO of the Planet Fitness, and guys, until we keep talking and keep rooting it and keep pushing, these guys are going to get away with literal murder, pedophilia, sex trafficking, and abusing children until we keep going. Like, I don't know how many times I could say Bill Clinton was there 50 times. Explain yourself. And nobody, and like, there, if it's not for people like you and people like us, it just keeps going as another story with the news cycle. And that's why we keep talking about it, and I'm going to keep doing it. Derrick, we have 1 minute left, but I definitely want you to touch on this. You covered a landmark lawsuit with the Fluoride Action Network challenging the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency's fluoride policies. You unveiled the shadowy interest and the relentless efforts of the EPA to perpetrate the mass medication of citizens without their consent through water fluoridation. It's a profound implication of fluoride exposure on children and infants. I know we only have a minute, Derrick, but can you please just briefly elaborate what this is all about, the seriousness of the situation and what's happening?
Absolutely. Thanks for making time for this, because I do think it's a huge story, and I'm glad you guys are asking because not enough people are paying attention. If anybody wants to dive deeper, you can go to my website and go to thelastamericanvagabond.com. I have whole sections on my website about this. But long story short, this started back in 2016 with the citizen petition to the EPA under what's known as the Toxic Substance Control Act. The Fluoride Action Network, Moms Against Fluoridation, Food and Water Watch, some other groups, they filed this petition, and they filed it with evidence showing studies that have proven that fluoride is a neurotoxin, that it's linked to lowering IQ in children. And the EPA denied the petition. They filed suit, they being the Fluoride Action Network, and it's been kind of going back and forth in the court since then. The first phase of the trial was back in 2020. The judge put it on hold, and it was only supposed to be a short hold, but it didn't resume until just this year, January 2024. And I went to San Francisco for 2 weeks. I was in the courtroom reporting every day, doing live tweeting. I was interviewing the scientists, the experts about this harm caused by fluoride. And what people need to know is this, is that the U.S. National Toxicology Program, the scientists at the U.S. government's own National Toxicology Program, they have finished a report, which the government has blocked for several years now, which conclusively says that fluoride is linked to lower IQ in children. Fluoride exposure is linked to lower IQ in children, specifically during prenatal, when a mother's pregnant, drinking fluoridated water. Afterwards, if she's using fluoridated water to make her formula, or if she's just drinking fluoridated water, that's going to go through her breast milk. And this is showing up in terms of lower IQ throughout children's developmental age. Fluoride's also been linked to thyroid problems, which is linked to mental health. This is something that's much more prevalent in women. We still don't know all the full answers, but the point we do know now through this trial, thanks to the hard work of the Fluoride Action Network, is that elements of the U.S. government, including U.S. Assistant Health Secretary Rachel/Richard Levine, is responsible for blocking this report. And we know that because emails that came out through this report specifically say that Admiral Assistant Secretary of Health Levine does not want this report to come out, and then it was blocked from coming out in May 2022. It has still not officially been released. The only reason we've even seen it is because the judge in this lawsuit forced them to release it in its draft form, and that report shows the scientists at the U.S. government's own program fighting to get this truth to the public. Unfortunately, the CDC's Oral Health Division, which is very much influenced by the dentist industry, the Assistant Secretary of Health and Health and Human Services, the FDA, they're all still promoting fluoride as if it's, the best thing ever. They call it one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. And right now, where things are is all the evidence has been presented. The arguments are closed. Everything has, the trial has ended. It's all in the hands of Judge Edward Chin over in San Francisco, and he's been reviewing it for about a month now, and we are expecting that in the next week or two, we'll have a ruling. But the important thing to take away is that if he rules in favor of the Fluoride Action Network, this could be the end of water fluoridation in the United States, and that could have ripples all across the world, really, because it's be the first time, it's already been a historic trial because of the first time in a federal court that we've heard evidence from scientific experts, who I interviewed all three of these experts. You can find that at theconsciousresistance.com, who said in a federal court, presenting this evidence to a federal judge for the first time, the harms associated with fluoride in the water. And that makes it historic for that reason alone. And if we win, if the plaintiffs win, this really could be some actual positive news in a sea of bad news. So I encourage everybody to follow me or just keep up with the Fluoride Action Network, and we should have some information very soon.
Perfect. Derrick, thank you so much, brother. God bless you for all that you do, all the work that you do. Derrick, can you just really fast tell everybody where to find you, what you're working on, and I could have Kelly put your stuff in the link.
All links in the
all the links in the description.
I appreciate that, guys. Thank you again for your time. Happy to come back because I'd love to get deeper into technocracy and
I have
what's
some
coming
rap
next on the
questions that I
horizon.
didn't do.
Yeah, we have rap questions. So where do you want people to find you, Derrick?
So the best place would be theconsciousresistance.com. That's where you can find all my work. You can download my book, How to Opt Out the Technocratic State, for free, theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. The Pyramid of Power is at thepyramidofpower.net. And if you just want to learn more about my background, my website, derrickbroze.com, has some info on my story, as you mentioned, from prison and drug addiction to turning my life around and becoming a journalist. So thank you, guys.
Dude, Derrick, thank you so much, brother. Again, God bless you. Be safe and keep fighting the good fight, brother.
Thank you.